Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Toronto Apologetics. My name is Tony Costa, and I will be your host tonight. And we want to let you know that this channel, Toronto Apologetics, is a channel that deals with challenging ideas against Christianity. We deal with various contemporary issues. We deal with questions pertaining to the Christian faith, and we address those particular challenges, and we deal with various topics as well. So first thing we want to do is we want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel, to like and subscribe to the channel. Tonight, we're going to be dealing with Islam, and in particular, we are going to be dealing with the Quran. And so you may have heard from many Muslim apologists that we have only one Quran that has been perfectly preserved since the time of Muhammad. The Quran has never been changed. Unlike your Bibles that have been corrupted, your Bibles that have been changed, and the Bible is unreliable because it has been corrupted by Jews and Christians and so forth. Part of the charge is that Jews and Christians removed references to Muhammad that they believed were in the Bible, and those sources were expunged to hide the true identity of the Prophet of Islam. And so tonight, we're going to be dealing with the question, how many Qurans are there? Is there one Quran, 10 Qurans, 20 Qurans? How many Qurans are there? And so tonight, it gives me great joy and a great pleasure to bring on a dear friend and brother in Christ, Dr. Bernie Power. Welcome, Dr. Power.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Tony, and greetings to your audience.
Yes, and Dr. Power, if you can maybe share with us, I believe you are a missiologist, and you're also a lecturer at the Melbourne School of Theology. Can you tell us a little bit about Melbourne School of Theology?
Yep. So we're in Melbourne, in the south of Australia. We were originally called the Bible College of Victoria, and we're here basically training people for ministry. And we have a special department called the Arthur Jeffrey Centre, which focuses on Islam, and I lecture in that.
Yes, named after the famous scholar Arthur Jeffrey, who wrote the foreign vocabulary of the Quran and textual materials for the history of the Quran. A very good scholar. Yeah,
he was a Melbourne man, so that's why.
Right. And the other thing, Dr. Power, is I also understand you're teaching a course on Arabic, the Quranic Arabic. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about that, in case some of them are interested in taking your online course?
Sure. So we teach Arabic because we think for people involved in Islamic work, having Arabic is a really big advantage. And start off with assuming zero knowledge. I teach the course myself. We've set it up as an online course, so you'll have videos to watch, worksheets to work through. We've got a computer app, and then weekly Zoom sessions. And the first course, the beginners one, runs for 12 weeks, starts in mid-February, and then we'll have a second one. We'll go through the second part of the year. It's quite a fun group, and we make a lot of progress.
Yes, and I do want to credit you, Bernie, because when I wanted to learn Arabic Quran, you're the one who directed me to various resources on Arabic Quran. So, folks, if you're interested in learning the Quran and learning particularly the Arabic of the Quran, I would highly recommend Dr. Power's course. All of that information is in the description box, so you could go there to register. If you have any questions, you could always contact me, and I'll pass that on to Dr. Power. Dr. Power, you also wrote a book, I believe, on sharing the gospel with Muslims.
Yeah, I've written a couple. I've got it here. The latest one's called Storytellers, and it's an approach using telling stories to answer questions that Muslims ask. We lived in 4 countries over 21 years, in Pakistan, Jordan, Oman, and Yemen, and many of the people we dealt with were illiterate, so it was no good giving them a Bible. They couldn't read it, even in their own language. And so I developed a storytelling pattern based on Arab folk tales to answer the questions that Muslims would often ask about why do we believe Jesus is the Son of God? Why do we believe he died? Why don't we follow Muhammad? So I've developed those, and I've put them into a kind of a narrative, telling some of the things that my wife and I faced in our different times overseas, and then how we use the story. So it's a whole lot of stories within a bigger story.
Yes, that sounds wonderful, because there's a storyline behind it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Can you also? I know you've been engaged in some debates as well. That's how I learned about you. Actually, you had a debate in, I think it was somewhere in Australia, on this very question that we're asking tonight: how many Qurans are there? So you are open to dialogue. You are open to debate with other Muslims and trying to get to the facts.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's an important way. We actually brought Adnan Rashid out from the UK to do some debates with myself and with a colleague, Samuel Green.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way for us to be able to get Christian truth out there, and also to be able to respond to some of the claims of Islam.
Yes, yes, and Samuel Green is a dear friend. He's been here in Canada, and we've ministered together. So he's a dear brother in the Lord as well. So, Dr. Power, we're talking tonight about, is there only one Quran? And so I do have a PowerPoint to share with our viewers. Would you like me to bring that up now, and you could start
Yes,
your
yeah,
presentation?
yes, I do the one Qur'ans too.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the big question that Muslims will often claim is that there is only one Quran, that there's never been another one. And tonight, we want to challenge that, just to put an alternative view, and based on the Islamic sources. So it goes through the next one. I don't think I can control the slides from here. Yeah, so I'll just nod when we're going through.
You can just say next slide. Yeah.
Okay, next slide. Yeah. So here's a couple of quotes. I've got actually about 10 of these, but I'll only use 3 of them tonight. 4 of them tonight. Yeah. So the first one is from Fethullah Gulen, who's a Turkish billionaire who's currently living in the States. And he said the Quran's text is entirely reliable. It has not been altered, edited, or tampered with since it was revealed. All Muslims know only one Quran, perfectly preserved in its original words since the Prophet's death when revelation ended. So that's his claim. And the next one. Yusuf Ali, very famous translator of the Quran, up until probably the 1980s, his was the go-to version. And he says, so well has the Quran been preserved, both in memory and in writing, that the Arabic text we have today is identical to the text as was revealed to the Prophet. Not a single letter has yielded to corruption during the passage of the centuries. So he should know about these things because he's a translator, but we'll see later that that's not correct. Next one. This is Dr. El-Hajj Ajijola, who's an African scholar. He says, the Quran is fully preserved and not a jot or tittle has been changed or left out. So channeling the words of Jesus to talk about the Quran. And then the last one, and this was yours, Tony, in a debate with Shabir Ali. He says, we have a copy of the Quran dating from 790 in the British Museum. That's 1,300 years ago. And we can compare that with what we're reading today, and we find them to be exactly identical. So this is a common claim that Muslims make. And Dr. Costa was right. We do get accosted on the street. We have a street outreach every week where we engage with Muslims, and they'll come up with this claim that the Quran has never been changed. There is only one Quran, whereas your Bible has been changed. It gets changed every year. But there's a big problem with this one. Next slide. The claim that they make is that the verses that were revealed to Muhammad through the angel Gabriel, there was only one undisputed version that came from him. That was then passed on to his followers, who either remembered it or recited it or recorded it. And that has turned in today one universally accepted text that is the same as what Muhammad said. So 1,400 years, absolutely no change is their claim. And there's a problem with this. I call it you call it Lego. In Australia, we call it Lego. Lego land technology. What they're trying to do is they're using 7th century Arabic and claiming 21st century accuracy. You could use Lego to build an identical replica of a Saturn V rocket, but there's no way you could get to the moon with it. Its materials just aren't fit for the purposes. It won't complete the processes or products that they're claiming that it can do. And the Quran actually suffers from that, and we'll see why in a few minutes. Next. The first one is that it's got a defective writing system. There's no way with the Quran that you can produce 100% accuracy in transmission from the earliest texts. And the second one is that handwritten manuscripts from the 7th century can't be 100% accurate like printed copies. Muslims were very slow in taking up the printing press. Napoleon brought one over to Egypt in 1800, the very first one in the Muslim world, even though it had been invented by Gutenberg, 3.5 centuries earlier. And then the first major one was printed in Egypt in 1923 under the modern thing. And we can say since 1923, the Qurans that were printed then haven't changed from the Qurans that we have today, but we can't go back 14 centuries and make that same claim. And here's proof. You can see behind me here are my 24 different Arabic versions of the Quran. They're all up there. I only had 23 in that picture. It was taken, but I've got one more. Next page. What we're not talking about is English translations of the Quran. When Muslims kind of accost us about this, they'll say, oh, yeah, you've got your King James Version and your RSV and your NIV. They're English translations of the Bible. And we're not talking about English translations of the Quran. There's 106 of those that I've been able to uncover. Next slide. We're only talking about the Arabic Quran, what the Arabic text itself actually says. And I'm going to show you how the Arabic text came to be different over the centuries and why we have multiple copies of the Quran today. These are freely available. You can write to this bookshop. I've actually been to it in Jordan. We lived in Jordan for a couple of years. And there you can get different versions of the Quran. They sell them, they print them. Yeah, next one.
Okay.
Or you can go to Lebanon, or you can buy them online. So these, I bought them with my credit card. Just here in Australia, sit down there, fill in the application online, and it arrives within usually within 2 weeks. And they're cheap, like they're only $5 to $10 each. And they're good quality, nicely bound books and good quality paper and well written. Next one. So how did we actually get to this situation from this claim that there's only ever been one Quran to multiple versions that you can get? And I've got 24. People are claiming that they've got more versions than this. I haven't been able to find those other ones. A lot of mine I also bought as I lived in the Muslim world. I'd go to bookshops around. So we went to Israel for a trip and I came back with 6 Arabic Qurans I got from a bookshop in Jerusalem. I bought them in Libya, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria and Sudan, Egypt, picking up all these different versions of the Quran. So Dr. Shabir Ali talks about how this actually came to be. I'm going to try and play a video clip from him now. Let's see if this is going to work. I have to drag it up there. Let's see.
Did you want me to bring it up?
Yeah, if you can bring that up.
He said that the Quran has been revealed in 7.
Okay, all right. So it's not that
Muslim
one.
scholars.
Is it this one here?
Most Muslims read the Quran.
We want to stop that one and open up the other one. So yeah.
Okay, so this one here.
Referring to a tradition, according to.
No, not that one. How do I get rid of that?
Okay, so these are the only 2 I see. They also got.
I want to get clarity. So so you're saying that the point that was made.
Stop. No. It should be this one. Okay. Can you see? Oh, yeah, only let me run to at the moment.
Well, there's these two here. There's this one here.
Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, said that the Quran
This one.
No. And then there's another one from
text that is.
Is that the one?
Okay. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Today, most Muslims read the Quran in a text that is referred to as the Egyptian edition of 1924. That's how scholars refer to it. Most Muslims may not have realized that this is the designation for that manuscript, for that text. To Muslims in general, this is just simply the Quran. But this is not the only text of the Quran that is read throughout the world. In North Africa, there is a slightly different text that is based on a slightly different reading, mostly corresponding to what we read in the rest of the world, but with some slight variations that do not affect anything that Muslims believe and do not have any major impact on any Muslim practices. And then, too, in some parts of Africa, there is another reading of the Quran and a matching manuscript that is prevalent. And here, too, we find some slight variations that do not affect Muslim beliefs and do not affect Muslim practices in any significant degree. So how do we make sense of all of this? We want to retrace the history of how these manuscripts became divergent. How is it that we have a variety of readings of the Quran and manuscripts to match, or rather even now printed texts to match? Now, today, in a Muslim college in which imams are being trained to serve the community, an imam, if he specializes in the recitations of the Quran, he may be taught as many as 10 different recitations of the Quran. And these 10 recitations complement each other. They basically, again, have no effect on the beliefs of Muslims, and they do not affect in any significant degree the practices of Muslims. So we want to get to grip of this. How did all of this come to pass? In the time of the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, the most important impetus was to ensure that the message of the Quran would be absorbed and put into practice and taught to others. So the precise words, which are the vehicles through which the important teachings are being disseminated, were not so important. The teachings were important, but the precise words to preserve them were not of paramount importance. They did not trump in importance the need for the message of the Quran to be absorbed, to be practiced, and to be taught by others. And in fact, if the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, had insisted on his followers that they should pay due importance to the wording of the Quran to get every letter and sound correctly, then that may have detracted from the focus on getting the message across and implementing that in the lives of new Muslims. So with all of the challenges that the community faced in that early phase, it was important for the Muslims to focus on the meaning and the message and to circulate that. So one Muslim would go tell another one, look, we got a new teaching in the form of the Quran. And the other one is asking, what does the Quran say? And then he repeats the saying and the teaching of the Quran without necessarily getting precisely the same words in which they were first delivered by the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace. So there was this period in which Muslims had the opportunity to teach others the Quran without insisting on the precise words. Now, of course, we have to explain how did these variety of readings still manifest. Well, the text in which Uthman, on whom be peace, Uthman, may God be pleased with him, had preserved the Quran was written without vowel points and without dots that distinguish between look-alike letters. The text that Uthman prepared could be interpreted, could be read in a variety of ways, and that's one of the reasons why we have, surviving to this day, a variety of recitations, some of which may go back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace. In fact, it is a common Muslim belief that we are not allowed to invent anything in the Quran, and it is generally presumed that all of these readings must somehow go back to the early teachers, even those within the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, those who heard the Quran directly from the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself, the messenger of God.
You can see this is quite a big shift from what he was claiming earlier, that there's only one Quran, that it's never been changed. He's saying, well, Muhammad told things and the precise words were not important. Well, I would challenge that. If they believe this was the words of Allah, he would have expected people to have memorized it in the same way that he presented it. And secondly, he said there were a variety of reasons. Some of them may go back to the Prophet. So there's a fair bit of uncertainty that he's now injected into this discussion that wasn't there before. The claim that, only one Quran, never been changed. He's saying, well, there's slight variations. They don't affect the belief or the practice. But that's not what the claim of Muslims is. The claim is, there's never been any change. You'll only ever find one Quran. So I think that's important. Do you have a comment on that?
Did you notice, Bernie, that when he said that even though there are all these variants within the Quran, which he never used to say. I debated Shabir. The first time I debated him was in 1992, and we've had a series of debates since then. And what he had said was the common mantra that we always hear, that the Quran has remained a homogeneous text, it's never been changed, and so forth. But did you notice he said that even notwithstanding the variants, it doesn't affect any core teaching of Islam and about Muhammad. Doesn't that sound familiar, Bernie? That Christians have been saying this for hundreds of years, that none of the variants in the New Testament affect any cardinal doctrine of the Christian faith. And even Dr. Bart Ehrman, who's more of a radical leftist, he's even admitted the same, that none of these variants in the New Testament affect any core teachings of the New Testament. But we just heard Shabir using the very same argumentation to justify the differences in some of the readings not affecting any core doctrines of the Islamic faith.
Mm-hmm. And the other difference is that Christians are quite open about the variants. We have at the bottom of the text, this is not found in some manuscripts, or other manuscripts might say such and such. We're very honest about that, but Muslims have been denying this for centuries, even though it's been very obvious. It's in the earliest texts. So it's good that they're finally coming clean on it. Not all of them, by the way.
So here I have, I've shown this before, Bernie, but here I have the Greek New Testament. This is the Nessie Allen 28. And if you notice, there's the Greek text on top here, and underneath you have an apparatus. It shows you the textual variants and so forth. And we have the same with the Hebrew Bible, but we really don't have anything like that when it comes to the Quran. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Bernie, but is there a critical apparatus of the Quran today, a textual critical apparatus?
Well, there is, and I've got actually a couple of books here which show that, and I bought these, some here in Australia, but most of them overseas. So this one here, it's got 6 variants, and they're actually color coded, so you can look at it and you can see some are blue, some are red, some are green. So that's 6 in that one. Here's another one with 10 different Quran versions, and so it will have the text there, and written on the side there are the variants that will have that there. So you can go through and look at the things. So all of these variants that I've got, they will be in here. Not all of them, actually not all of them, because this one's only got 10 versions. I've got 24 versions, but there is another one with 14 Quranic variants. And again, the same kind of thing. So you've got your Arabic text there on the side, in the middle, and then the variations there on the side.
Right.
So it shouldn't come as any surprise to Muslims. Scholars have known about this for a long time. They've kept it quiet from their people and been feeding them the lie that the Quran has never been changed. And so poor Muslims, they're just so embarrassed when they find, they've been tricked by their leaders who haven't been honest about this.
Right. So we'll continue then with the PowerPoint.
Yeah, sure. Next one. So it actually began right from the very beginning, and he mentioned there about under Abu Bakr. So when Muhammad died, by the way, when Muhammad died, there was no written text that he could pass on to his people and say, this is the Quran. He had recited things, and people had memorized them. And as Dr. Shabir Ali would say, they didn't memorize them very correctly. And some people had some written bits, but there was no one particular version. And so under Abu Bakr, the first caliph, he attempted to put one versions together. He collected all the bits, got a Zayd bin Thabit to collect all that he could and write a version, and he gave it to Hafsa, one of Muhammad's wives, and she stuck it under her bed. But there were other people who were Muhammad's followers who were collecting and writing them down. And in that little chart on the right, the map on the right-hand side, left-hand side, you can see down in the bottom there's Zayd bin Thabit in Medina, and he puts together a version of the Quran which has got 114 chapters. Up in the north in Damascus, Ubay bin Ka'b, and Muhammad said, if you learn the Quran, learn it from these four. And he mentioned these guys. Ubay bin Ka'b, he had a version of the Quran, but he's had 116 chapters. He'd actually, I think he'd split one of the chapters in two and made it long. He didn't agree with Zayd bin Thabit's one. Abdullah ibn Masud in Kufa, again, he'd been one of Muhammad's companions. In fact, he was the first man to recite the Quran publicly. He went to the mosque in Mecca in the very early days and started reciting the Quran and got beaten up. And Muhammad said, you've done enough. He had his own version, but he left out chapter 1, Al-Fatiha, and the last two chapters, 113 and 114. He said, these were never in the Quran. These were prayers of Muhammad. They were never intended. And then in Basra, another one of the people that Muhammad said learned the Quran from this man, Abu Musa, he actually added in 2 other chapters, and we have those still. So he's had 116 chapters. So here's 4 major versions that were floating around, differing in the number of chapters and in the content, some having more, some having less, a lot of it being agreed upon, but there were also variants in the way that they recited or presented the text. And in 652, under Uthman, it came to a head. The Muslim troops were invading Armenia, and they said to them, whoever follows the reading of Abdullah ibn Masud, go to this side of the mosque. Whoever follows Abu Musa, go to the other side. And they were reciting the Quran together, but they were differing. And so they started yelling at each other. And so one of their leaders, a guy named Hudhayfa, went down to the Caliph Uthman and said, we have to have only one Quran. So he said, okay, gather in all of the copies that you can. I'll get Zayd bin Thabit to write one, which he'd already done 20 years before. So you wonder why he needed to write another one. Right. And he said, and then burn all the others so that there's only one Quran. These are all from Islamic records, by the way, from people like al-Bukhari and who was the hadith collector, and Tabari, and also from Ibn Ishaq, the writer of the Sirah. So this isn't stuff that other people are making up. It's all written in there. So the Quran has been, from the very beginning, been a contested book, both in its size and its context.
Okay.
But Muslims will often say, well, yeah, one time some people came to Muhammad and recited the Quran in different ways. And Muhammad said, oh, yes, you're both right, because the Quran was revealed in 7 ahruf. The word in Arabic literally means letters. So you've got a harf when you write the letter, alif, ba, ta, that's a letter. And the plural of that is ahruf. So writing in 7 letters, it's not really quite clear. Dr. Shabir Ali comes up with a different kind of interpretation or some other possible meanings for that.
So I'll bring that up, Bernie. Bernie,
yeah,
play it.
sure,
Okay. So let me try to bring this up here.
Revealed in 7 ahruf.
That's the one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Muslim scholars have made sense of this by referring to a tradition according to which the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, said that the Quran has been revealed in 7 ahruf. And I have to come back and explain that term, ahruf. In any case, that tradition says you can recite of any of these, whichever is easy for you. And moreover, that each one of them by itself is complete, and each one serves as a healing. Now, to use comparable language from our Christian friends, we see that sometimes there is the statement, that which is sufficient for your salvation. So it looks like what this tradition is saying is that if you read according to any one of the readings, then this is sufficient for your salvation. And with this in mind, it gives great comfort to the average Muslim knowing that you can read just one of these readings in one text, like, for example, the 1924 Cairo edition of the Quran, and that is sufficient for you as a book of guidance. It is sufficient for you to have salvation, because, again, the various readings do not change anything that Muslims believe and do not affect the practices of Muslims in any significant degree. So it's not like one of these readings is going to tell you that there is only one God, and another reading is going to say, hey, wait a minute, there is another God along with God. No, the central beliefs of Muslims are all unaffected by these variety of readings. But now, the tradition says that the Quran has been revealed in the 7 modes. Now, I said ahruf previously, that's an Arabic word, and the singular is harf, which means letter. So it literally means 7 letters. But this word could also mean edge. The word harf could mean edge. So maybe it means 7 limits. And in fact, Muslim scholars have not been able to define this term with any unanimity. And a wide variety of opinions have been given as to what this term means. What does it mean to say that the Quran has been revealed according to 7 edges or 7 letters? It may mean, according to some scholars, that the Quran has been revealed according to 7 dialects of the Arabic language. So whereas there was today one standard Arabic language, which is called Modern Standard Arabic, the language that is the language of textbooks and newspapers and magazines and news broadcasts and so on, that being an official language, there will be a wide variety of spoken languages in the Arab world. To the extent that sometimes the people of one region cannot understand the people of another region, though each one understands themselves to be speaking the Arabic language. Something like this may have prevailed even within the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace. So there were regional dialects of the Arabic language, and it looks like the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, may have permitted his companions in the initial phase to recite the Quran in terms of its meaning, to express that meaning in their familiar terms and their modes of expression according to their dialects.
So it's not really clear what it means, and he says Muslim scholars have been unable to define it with any kind of unanimity or even clarity. It's a word, it doesn't make sense in the Arabic language. How can you recite something according to a letter, or even according to an edge or a limit? So he's really kind of struggling to find an explanation for this. One common one is that the different Arab tribes have had different kind of dialects, and you could recite it with your different dialects. So if you're Scottish or American or Canadian or Australian or New Zealand, we speak English in slightly different ways, and that's quite okay. But that doesn't mean that you'll get any changes in meaning. The meaning should always be the same. And as we'll see later on, that these different versions of the Quran that I have do actually have some different meanings in them. Okay. So this is Adnan Rashid. He's giving a different kind of interpretation of this. And as mentioned before, he said, scholars haven't been able to agree. have a listen to what Adnan Rashid says. He's a British scholar.
About how the ahruf relate to the qira'at that we.
Okay.
So let me ask you one. I want to get clarity here. So so you're saying that the point that was made, it was about discussion about how the ahruf relate to the qira'at that we have.
Yes.
But when it comes
Not about the text.
Yes.
The text of the Quran is there from the first century.
Yeah.
We just read it. We read it today.
So, Adnan, tell me one thing. When it comes to, because I think this was mentioned, when it comes to the reading Hafs or Warsh, when we read Hafs and Warsh, this is what was given to us by the Prophet ﷺ.
You are reading Hafs and Warsh from the same mushaf, from the same text. As I explained, Hafs, Warsh, Qalun, Duri, Ibn Kathir, all of these different styles of readings are based upon exactly that text you see on the screen. Exactly that text you see on the screen. Okay, Hafs is not different Quran, Warsh is not different Quran. Okay, Qalun or Duri or other readings are not different Qurans. They are one text being read slightly differently.
And all of those different readings are authentically preserved,
transmitted. All of those pronunciations, all of those variants, all of those slight variants are directly traceable back to the Prophet. And this is where the scholars have this opinion that they actually originate in the ahruf, those 7 modes.
Got you.
So these slight variations of readings of the same text of the Quran, which we saw on the screen from the first century, originate in those 7 modes. They originate from those 7 modes. This is one of the opinions. Okay, to clarify, this is one of the opinions. And scholars have many other opinions on the nature of ahruf and their relation to the Qur'an. Okay, and classical scholars have written books on this. Okay, Al-Jazari, for example. There is a book by Imam Al-Jazari. Okay, and there is a book, it's a brief book on this issue, Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran by Imam Suyuti. He discusses these matters. Okay, he gives some of the opinions, and there are many books written by other scholars explaining the nature of ahruf and the qira'at. Okay, and their relationship with each other.
That didn't really clarify things at all. He just claims that when we read the Quran, and I've got the two, so when they talk about this term qira'at, this simply means a reading, and we'll talk about that later, where that term came from. And the versions that I've got here, they're different. He says, you read from the same and it's exactly the same. It's not the same. He's just misleading us by claiming that they are. And I could give him the Arabic text and he could read it, and he could read another sentence and he would say those are different because they are different words. So he hasn't been quite honest. All right, let's go on to the next one. When so we talked before about the different versions. So this one here, the Hafs version, you can see there in the center. This is the most commonly accepted one. It's the one which is promoted by the Saudi Arabs, and they make it freely available. If you write to the Saudi embassy in your capital city, you can get free copies of this. I've accessed hundreds of them to give out to people for purposes of our study. But that was just one of the 24 that I've got here, and he got his version from a man named Asim, and we'll see how that came about. But that was the version that we have today has actually come down through a man called Ibn Mujahid, and there were a couple of variations of that before it came to us. So we don't actually have his version. We've got a version of what someone wrote from what he said. So each one of these ones, these were all his students. They all recorded in slightly different ways, partly because of problems within the Arabic text, we'll look at later, and partly because they had some preferences about what they wanted to see in there. And again, we'll see some of those later on. So these are the 7 texts. So this man, Ibn Mujahid, so he died, I think it was 836. So remember, Muhammad died 632. So we're talking about 200 years after Muhammad. A man is, maybe he died earlier than that. Sorry, later than that. Haven't got his date written down here. But he said, well, there were 7 ahruf, so I'm going to find for you 7 readers. and there were many possible ones that he could have chosen from. Here are the 7 that he chose. So Nafi, Ibn Kathir, Abu Amr, Ibn Amir, Asim, Hamza, and Al-Kisai. We don't have any of those, by the way. All we have, or we don't have most of them, we have is what was copied from them by their students. So Nafi, we have Qalun and Warsh. Warsh would be the number 2 in popularity, and from each of those. And the one that's really important is from Asim, we have this man called Hafs, and this is the one that the Saudis are promoting. But again, as I mentioned, we don't have his copy. We have how it was passed down to 2 other people, but they also transmitted it to 24 others, and he Asim transmitted it to another guy, Shuba, who passed it on to 58 others. So we've actually got 120 possible ones that we could have taken from that. And when you put them all together, 816 possible readings. So we have chosen, it's like a bit of a lucky dip, pulled one out and said, this is it. But there were 800 other possible ones that we could have chosen that were around at that time. And Ibn Mujahid chose the number 7 because he said, oh, well, Muhammad has this saying about 7 readings. So I will pick 7 important scholars that are well known and as transmitters of the Quran, and the copies that were passed on to them, and those will be the key ones. So it was really quite a random process.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Shadi Nasser, who's a Lebanese scholar who's been writing on this. He's written a book called The Second Canonization of the Quran. That's his second book. The first one's called Variants Within the Qira'at. And he says, well, actually, the Quran has gone through 5 canonizations, which means 5 recognitions of its authority. He says Muhammad died in 632 AD. The first canonization happened under Uthman. He probably should have put in Abu Bakr, but he puts the 2 together in 656. So 25 years later, Uthman gets his. And then in 936 is the date. So 300 years later, Ibn Mujahid says, well, we need to have 7. There are 800 possible ones I could choose from. I'm just going to choose 7 of those, and you should accept one of those 7. So these are kind of the 7 ahruf. But about 120 years later, these 2 men, Adani and Ashatabi, said, we know that with these 7, there are all these other possibilities. We need to limit those down. So let's just say 2 of the possibilities that came from them, we will accept. So it was down to now 14 readings that you could have, the 7 multiplied by 2, because the 7 for the most part had disappeared. And then another 300 years later, a man called Jazari said, well, 7 is not actually too few because we know there are a lot more. There are 800 possible ones. Let's make it 10. And from those 10, we can have a couple of options as well. So this is where we get our 24 from. There were actually like 36, I think, that were added to that. So some of them had 3 or 4 transmissions that were accepted. So there were multiple copies that you could choose from, but he said these are the only ones. So this was the 4th canonization. And then in 1923, Al-Azhar University said, we will only accept the Hafs version. And we'll see what happened to the other versions later on. So you can see there's been a bit of a process. Some of it was political. Sometimes they included someone, they said, we need someone from Egypt. So there was a bit of identity politics going on then. You know, we need to have someone from Damascus, someone from Medina to make sure we were inclusive. And so that process went on. Okay.
Okay.
That's probably the end of that one. Yeah, so need to go back to Qira'at and see if you can find, I'll tell you which slide it'll be.
Okay. Well, that's the end of that one.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And what's the other one called again?
It's called just Qira'at.
Okay. Just
that
Qira'at.
was the first one I sent you, so it's a big one.
Okay. All right. Now it's telling me it's a little too large here, but
can you pull a video out of it?
let's see.
It should be on slide 22.
Slide 22. Okay.
Yeah, there's Dr. Yasser Qadi on why we shouldn't be talking about this.
Okay.
If you can upload that video.
Okay. It's not Kiryat too. It's just Kiryat. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Kiryat. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Yeah, it's telling me it's too large.
Can you even isolate the? Oh, now maybe I can do it from here. Let me see.
Okay.
Let's see if I can do this one. I want Yasser Qadi on the wires. Oh yeah. Okay. I think I can do it here.
Okay. There we go.
Okay, let's see if that one goes.
Do you want me to bring it up? I could.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
What is your position in relation to preservation of Quran? Is, for example, Hafs an Asim, riwayat Hafs an Asim, do you see it as preserved, munazzal from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or do you not see that as munazzal? What's your position?
Jayyid. Okay, so first and foremost, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna nahnu nazzal dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. So we believe, as a matter of theology, as a matter of aqeedah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preserved the Quran, no question about it. Every single student of knowledge knows, who studies ulum al-Quran, that the most difficult topics are ahruf and qira'at, and the concept of ahruf and the reality of ahruf, and the relationship of the Uthmanic Mus'haf with the ahruf, and the preservation of the ahruf. Is it 1, is it 3, is it 7? And the relationship of the qira'at to the ahruf. This is a topic that when you're the beginning student of knowledge, you're like, what is all of this going on here? When you go a little bit more, you learn to simply memorize what your teachers say and regurgitate it out, and you don't fully comprehend. When you do a deep dive is when things get very, very awkward and difficult. And this isn't new. This is from the time of the Sahaba. In the Sahih or the Hasan hadith of Ubay bin Ka'b, the hadith of the ahruf, that when the Prophet mentioned the issue of ahruf, and that there are different ahruf and whatnot, this is in the version of Muslim Imam Ahmad. Ubay bin Ka'b says, authentic hadith, فَدَخَلَ فِي نَفْسِي شَكٍّ. In my heart, a doubt came that I hadn't had about Islam since the days of Jahiliyyah. This is not a joke, brothers and sisters. The issue of ahruf and qira'at caused confusion to somebody whom the Prophet said, if you want to listen to the Quran directly, listen to Ubay. Ubay is not some even...
I'm sorry about that. My apologies.
The Qari of the Quran. He is the master. He is who he is. And he goes, فَدَخَلْ فِي نَفْسِي شَكٍّ. What is all of this stuff? And the Prophet put his hand, and then he goes, it all went away. Ya akhi, me and you, we don't have that blessing, do we? These are very, very difficult issues. And the most advanced of our scholars, they're not quite fully certain how to solve all of the unanswered questions in there. Ibn al-Jazari, who without a doubt is the greatest scholar of qira'at for the last 1,000 years. Ibn al-Jazari famously writes, I have been thinking and pondering, I've been thinking and pondering about the issue of the ahruf and qira'at for over 35 years. Nayfan wa talatina sana, he said, right? And confused and whatnot, then finally, this is my response. And by the way, even that 7, all later scholars say, well, that doesn't make any sense. So they kind of dismissed even that. After 35 years, the greatest scholar of qira'at.
Some accepted it. Some accepted it.
It doesn't answer the question. Anyway, I don't want to get into that issue.
Okay, fine.
Why do I not want to get to that issue? Here's the point. These issues should only be discussed amongst people who know what the qira'at are and who understand some of these questions that are being... And by the way, this is now a well-known open secret amongst many Muslim graduate students and academics around the world. And this is well-known. Traditional understandings of ahruf and qira'at cannot answer some of these pressing questions that are now being poked by our people outside of, by our academics, by their academics outside of the faith tradition. You see, in a Muslim environment, there's always some respect that we have for the Quran. We should. In a Muslim environment, we'll press a little bit, and then we'll say, okay, khalas, sami'na wa ata'na. And that's great, alhamdulillah. When you go to academia, they don't have that red line. And they're going to just, you know, the famous story of the emperor with no clothes. They're going to just point out, no, that doesn't make any sense. Well, that's not true, and this and that. And they'll bring issues, which I'm not going to mention explicitly, that you know are true because they're in your own books. They're not inventing anything new. They'll bring you riwayat, and they'll bring you athar, and then you add to that very well-known issues of, I don't even want to be explicit. And then you bring on top of that makhtutat, and then. And it's very clear to you and to every single very advanced student and specialist that the standard narrative has holes in it. That's what I'm going to say. The standard narrative does not answer some very pressing questions. Okay? This is what I'm going to say. By and large, our ulama in the Eastern world are not aware, by and large, of what's going on in the Western side of things. And they're not answering those questions in a manner that it needs to be answered. And this is something all of us that are in academia fully acknowledge. This issue of ahruf and qira'at has troubled the ummah from the very beginning of time. It's nothing new. And there are 15 opinions about this. None of them fully answer all of the questions that are raised. Some of them answer more than others. So the issues of the relationship, of the origins, of the ikhtilaf and all of this should only be discussed amongst those who are familiar with this science. I can't answer this question in a 20-minute interview, nor is it wise to do so, which is why I never brought this topic up myself. You will not find one lecture of mine about this issue. It should never be brought up in public. And I don't like these idiots, and they are idiots, wallahi, because they're the ones who caused this. In this issue, they're utter idiots who did something haram. And I don't like saying this. This is not something you discuss amongst the masses, ya akhi. It's not wise. You don't understand qira'at, let it be.
The saddest thing about that video is Dr. Yasir Qadi is a graduate of Yale University. He got his doctorate from there. You would expect he would say, this is an issue, let's get in and study it. He's saying, no, let's just be quiet about it. Let's not talk about it. I'm not going to bring it up. I'm not going to discuss it in public. And the idiots, he was in a private group that were discussing this together. And one of the guys leaked the views out there in the public media, and that's why he says, you know, these idiots, they've kind of effectively blown the whistle on this big problem, and he says it's got holes in it. Our best minds have worked on it. We haven't been able to sort out an answer to it, which is pretty sad. So,
yes. Yes, the famous holes in the narrative. That phrase continues to haunt Dr.
That's right. After this, he then went off all social media, said, I'm not going to broadcast stuff anymore. And he got roundly criticized by Muslims who, you know, called him an apostate and all kinds of things for talking about it. Yes. But we'll see later on, it gets even worse. So stay tuned. Now with these slides,
is this correct?
That's exactly it. Perfect. Good. Okay. Yeah. So there was a transmission process that went on, and Muslims would say, well, this stuff came from Muhammad himself, and this is how it happened. So Muhammad died 632, his generation 0. He recited the Quran to a whole lot of people. So they'd say there's like 65 scribes who wrote down parts of the Quran, and hundreds, maybe thousands who'd even heard it. But these were the 4 that this man, Abu Abdurrahman as-Sulami, said, I got the Quran from these guys, and then he taught a guy whose name was Asim, and he taught a guy whose name was Hafs. So this is this most famous version of the Quran. But he also taught another guy named Shu'bah, and Shu'bah has also written a version of the Quran. And I have both of them here, and it might surprise you to hear that they're different. So either Asim didn't do a good job of telling his students what he had learned, or they weren't very good students in picking it up, because they sat there listening to him recite the Quran. They wrote down what they thought they heard, or maybe they wrote down what they wanted, and they've got 2 different Qurans. And we'll look at the extent of some of those differences later on. So, you know, this whole idea of, you know, this was a perfect preservation process is just not true. It was happening even at this. This is the first generation of the one we don't have anything written before this generation 3. So the 7 that were, the reason those 7 were chosen was they were the earliest written copies that are readable of the Quran.
Okay, before going on to the next slide, Dr. Power. So folks, thank you for joining. If you're just joining us, I'm being joined by Dr. Power from the Melbourne School of Theology. We're talking about why there's so many Qurans and so forth. So we're talking a little bit about the history of the composition of the Quran, the textual criticism of the Quran, and so forth. If you have any questions, I noticed some of the questions already in the chat. If you have any questions, just put a capital Q in front of your question. And then when we come to the end, we will take your questions. So please do leave your questions in the chat. We will get to them. So we'll just move on to the next slide, Dr. Power.
All right. Okay. So the other major one that's around is the Warsh version. And again, similar process. He claims that it came from Muhammad, who went to Ubay bin Ka'b. Muhammad said, he said, if you want to learn the Quran, learn it from this guy. He was one of the 4. He taught a couple of other people, Abu Huraira and Ibn Abbas and Abdullah ibn Ayyash. They then passed it on to the next generation of these 4 guys. And then it went to a guy called Nafi. And then the version went to Warsh and Qalun. And again, these were both students of Nafi, and I've got both of their Qurans here, and they're both different. So the same problem. And in that slide we looked at before, these weren't the only 2 students. There were dozens of them, and they all wrote down versions of the Quran, and they were, part of that 816 that Ibn Mujahid had the option to choose from, but he only chose the 7. Right. So there's a bit of a process. The other thing we're not sure about is when it said Nafi says, I learned it from these 5. Were they all together at one time, or did he pick up bits from one and bits from another? How was it actually conveyed, and how did they learn the Quran? They said, we learned it from these 3 guys. How did they actually learn that? So there's a fair bit of mystery in there, which is why Muslims are saying this is a problem that's too big for us to solve. Our greatest minds haven't been able to solve this. Okay. So a quick Arabic lesson. The Arabic alphabet has got 28 letters, and half of them have got dots on them. And without the dots, the next slide.
Okay.
Without the dots, you can't tell the differences between these letters. So if you go through and remove all the dots, there's a whole lot of question marks about them. Okay, next one. And in fact, without the dots, there are only 7 unambiguous letters out of the 28. So 21 of the 28 letters could be one other letter or 2 other letters, or even 3 or 4 other letters. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it could even be 5 letters, depending on where you put the dots. You can put 1, 2, 3 above, or 1 or 2 below. And so there's this ambiguity when you look at a text which doesn't have any dots. And you can actually make up different words. So a simpler letter, this is a 3-letter word, and you have a what's called the skeleton or the rasam, where you don't have the dots. Okay, next one. And you can put the dots in different places. So you can see some have got 1 above, 1 below, 2 above, 2 below, 3 above, even in there as well. Yep, some with 3 above. Yep. And when you put those in, you can generate, I've got here, I think 22 different words. And you can see the variety. You could say this word means he repents, or it could mean she destroyed. It could mean reliable, or it could mean a house. You've really got no idea where they are, depending on where you put the points. Mm-hmm. Next one. And then you can also add in the vowels. So Arabic, like Hebrew, doesn't normally have the vowels added in. You can add them in, and the Quran does have them in there. But when you put them in different places, again, it changes the meanings of them. So an undotted and unvoweled text is totally ambiguous. In fact, it's unreadable. I give an undotted text to Arab friends and say, we've got a Saudi lady living with us at the moment. I give it, she says, I can't read that. She said, it's my language. I've got no idea what it says. It could be anything. Okay, next one. So when we look at these differences between the Hafs and the Warsh texts, we can see that there are many differences. And I'll just see if I can pull out where is my Warsh one? Actually, I can just pull out any one. There it is. There's the Warsh one. So what I've done is I've got a whole lot of Arab friends to go through and to collate all of the differences. So each of these coloured tags represents a thing which is a consonantal difference or a long vowel difference which changes the meaning of the words. We haven't bothered about the short vowels because there are too many of them. We're finding an average of they're like 5,000, 6,000 of the short vowels differences. They do change the meaning, but they were just too hard for us to collate. So we went for the consonants and the long vowels, and there were 120 of them that we found, typically between 100 and 150 with all of the different versions. We've gone through, we've done comparisons with every single one of, not that one, with every single one of the versions. So I've got my Arab friends to go through and say, you read the two versions and you mark all those differences and put a tag in there so we can collate them. So we put them all together in a massive big table. Okay, next one. So some we see differences in the number of letters. Some they've got letters that are missing from one that's present in the other, and vice versa. Next one.
Okay.
Differences in meaning. So when you change the letters, like in English, it changes the meaning. Sometimes it can change to a different noun, or change a singular to a plural, or change a particle like a preposition into a verb. So I've got the example there on number C of slaves is abd, and the word for with is aind. So written exactly the same, you put the dots in different places and you've got the different words there. And there's a whole lot of different ways that you can go on. Next one. I'll run through these relatively quickly. And these were some of them, changing the meanings of nouns from Malik, which is owner, to Malik, which is king. The one, number 5 down there, I've highlighted. The word bushran or bushra is good tidings, and nushra is proclamation. So a different meaning in the two verbs there. And it's only the difference of a dot that changes the meaning. Next one. Can change nouns from singular to plural. One that Dr. Shabir Ali said, they don't change practice to a very great extent. The very top one there, it's about what you have to do if during Ramadan you can't fast, and it says you can feed, and the two versions, the Hafs says maskinin, that means a poor person, or the version says masakina, poor people. So it's actually an issue of law. How many, if you want to pay for not fasting, it's called the ransom fidya, then do you buy food for just one person or for a couple of people, and how many? So you're not quite sure of that based on these versions. Okay, next one. Yeah, so there's that one of slaves and with, by just changing the dot from above to below. Next one. Changing it to a different verb. Let me see. Yeah, in the number 2, the ones that I've highlighted is yakzibuna, means to lie, or yukadzibuna means to disbelieve. Qatala, he fought, or qutila, he was killed. So when you go into battle and you are killed or you fight, your reward is great. So the text isn't clear whether you're going to get a reward only if you die, or you just get a reward for participation. Next one. Changing from active to passive. Number 3, the one that's highlighted, he is led astray. So yudhallu, or he leads astray is yudhillu. So again, just the changes of the vowels will change it, whether he's a person who leads people astray or he gets led astray. Is he an active participant or a victim? changing verbs in there. So number 3 again. So anjana is he saved us, and anjana is you saved us. Sorry, anjatana, you saved us. So who's doing the saving? Is it somebody else, or is it somebody that he's relating to?
Right.
These ones changing from first person plural to third person plural. And the reason I've done the circles there is you can see it's not as though there's a consistent pattern that Hafs always does this and Warsh always does this. They're both switching sides constantly. So there's this kind of uncertainty within the text, you know, of what it could mean. It's no good saying, looking at the other text and doing a comparison, because that may have changed as well. So this is why Muslims have really struggled with this one, changing a verb from second person you to third person they. Yeah, so in number 2 there is, hard to read that, takulun is you say, and yakulun they say. Who's the speaker in this? Is it somebody that you're face to face with, or a person who's outside the conversation?
Yes. And yet the Quran claims to be mubin, that it's clear.
Mubin, exactly,
And
means
yet
clear.
when we look at this, we're thinking it's not as clear as it's made out to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's yeah, and changing masculine to feminine. So again, it can just be a couple of dots above or a couple of dots below that will flip a verb. So that again changes, you know, who is the actor and who is the person that's being acted upon. Just one little note there on the side. You can see there, the Rawaz version has, so we would protect you. So it's got 3 versions there. It feminine, or she would protect you. It masculine, or he would protect you, or we would protect you. So, and sometimes, actually, I might have picked this one up later. Go on, yeah. Changing from a statement to a command. So a statement is something about something that's happening now or happened in the past, and a command is something that you want to happen in the future. So big changes there. And then changing of meanings. Yeah, so the one there, yeah, so the highlighted one is a nabi or a nabi. The prophet, they're different spellings of the same word. So they've actually added an extra letter in there.
Okay.
And sometimes the English translation, when you read the one that they've done, the Halali and Khan, they actually quote from the Warsh translation because it makes more sense and it's more consistent. In the Quran, it's often changing person. It might start off with I and then end up with you and or he and we, and you're never quite sure who it's talking about. So sometimes they've standardized it so it makes a little bit more sense. But not based on the Arabic text. You can read the Arabic text and think that's not a proper translation of the English. So that's why it's good to learn Arabic. All right. And sometimes there's grammatical correction. So you'll find one. Here's this one I've got here between which versions? I've got, yeah, the Hafs and the Warsh version. Sometimes they'll have grammatical mistakes. And again, Muslim scholars have been talking about this right from the very beginning. When Uthman received the first copy of the Quran, he read it and he said, it's got some mistakes in it, but the people will correct that with their tongues. And I'm currently making a list of all of the mistakes. I've come up with hundreds of them, grammatical errors. And when I teach the course in Arabic, I get my students and say, here's one sentence and here's another verse of the Quran. They're only different in one thing. One of them's correct, one's incorrect. You tell me which one's correct. And they can tell that because one of them's not following the rules. So yeah, it's not even a correct book, let alone being a clear book.
A clear book, yeah.
And then the short vowel or the diacritical marking, there were just, yeah, I started on the first page, and after 10 pages I gave up. There were just so many of them. So I estimated there were 5,000 of them. The differences, and this is just between 2 versions. If we did the comparison between the whole 24 versions that I've got, it would just blow out massively. There would be thousands or hundreds of thousands of mistakes or variations.
Right.
Yeah, so here I talk about some of the ways in which, there are differences, and so defective spellings, incorrect spellings. These would be, and sometimes, where they've corrected what was incorrect in another version. And just to show you some of the ways it comes out. So the Hafs version, you can see the thing that's circled. It's got 2 dots on the top there, that first letter, which is the one Arabic's written from right to left, and that says takuluna. And then the Warsh version says yakuluna. So one of them says you say, and the other one is that they say. So switching the person. Next one. This one, gambling, it's a big sin, so it says kabirun. And in the Aduri version, one of the 24 here, it says kathirun, so it's a lot of sin. This one, it says on no intersection will be accepted, and here they use a masculine verb. So it says yukbalu, and the Ruh version says tukbalu, which is a feminine verb, which is actually more correct because the noun is feminine.
Right.
And you should always have noun and verb correspondence. So the Hafs version gets it wrong on this one and on many other occasions as well. Another one. It says he will expiate from you from some of your sins. So it's yukafiru, and the Asusi version says we will expiate you from some of your sins. Nukafiru. In the Quran, Allah sometimes refers to himself as he, sometimes as we, sometimes as I, and a couple of occasions is referred to as you. Is also referred to as you. So this could change who the speaker is, who's the one who's expiating people from their sins.
Right.
And changing from active to passive. Many a prophet fought alongside large bands of men. Many a prophet was killed alongside large bands of men. So one is qatala, and the other one is yuqtila. Qutila. And again, as Yasser Qadi says, this isn't new. So 350 years after Muhammad, this guy, Abi Yaqub Nadim, wrote or listed 7 books that Muslims had written about these discrepancies. So it's not as though it's suddenly, 21st century, we have to deal with this. It's been around for a long time, and they haven't dealt with it. Partly because they make these really high claims for, they're claiming rocket science for the Quran when it's actually Lego land kind of building. You don't have the tools within the language itself to be able to do these things. So we saw before that Uthman burned all of the variant versions, which is just a terrible sin. For Christians, if we come across a new manuscript of the Bible, we welcome it with joy, because we know this is going to improve our understanding, improve our knowledge, whereas Muslims want to hide it. So he said, okay, these things, I'm not accepting them. My version is the only one. Burn all the others. The Egyptians did the same thing when they canonized the Hafs version in 1924. They gathered all of the other versions, so every one of these other 23 would have been on that boat, and they dropped them into the Nile, which is a pretty sad way to deal with a holy book. But it would have been better to try and work out a way to deal with this. With this Saudi lady who's living with us, I said to her, do you know about all of these different versions? She said, oh yeah. She said, we were taught about those in school. She said, but we're taught only one of them is right. All the other ones are wrong.
Right. But that's an important point you made there, Bernie, about when we discover a manuscript, we treasure it. We're excited about it. The older it is, the better. And we don't try to destroy it. We don't try to burn it. But yet, in Islamic history, starting with Uthman, and then throughout, I think there were other periods. I think under, Abdul Malik and others, I think they tried to suppress Uthman's version of the Quran. And then you come to the Egyptian government in 1924, and even Shabir Ali admitted that that's the version that Muslims follow today, is the Hafs version. But it's just interesting how that we treasure our manuscripts. We put them in museums, and we want to learn. Even something like the Dead Sea Scrolls, it improved our understanding of the Old Testament, the transmission of the Old Testament. But when it comes to Islam, the way they treat even the Jews, as you know, Dr. Power, in Egypt, the Jews would create genizas where they would use Torahs and scriptures because they were so sacred that they had to either be entombed or even buried with respect. So to hear something like this is very alarming.
It is quite disappointing. Okay, next one. So the challenge, I'm going to be a little bit humorous here. I hope you'll indulge me. The Hafs version has reigned supreme for 100 years. So 1924, the Egyptian government, so El Azhar, said this is the version. And so, but people now are realizing there's something else out there. There are some other options, and they're wondering what else is out there. So on to the next one. There's many possible manuscripts. So there are dozens of early manuscripts, and all of them, actually, I didn't talk about this. The early ones had no dots in them. So that was why they're impossible to read. So you can see that one on the top there, on the right-hand side is an undotted manuscript, which I know Arabs can read, that I've showed it to them and they said, no, you can't read this. It doesn't make any sense. But we also know that there are many versions, and that's my 24 versions up there. So what are we going to do? Let's go for Quran Chef, and we'll have a cook-off to see who can come up with the best version. So we have Dr. Yasir Qadi, Dr. Shabir Ali, and Adnan Rashid, and they all give different answers on how we should go with this. Okay, so let's see the first offering. Well, Dr. Shabir Ali says, well, I'm sticking with the Hafs version. I'm happy with that. Let's go plain and simple. We don't have to worry about all these other ones. Let's just stick with that. And he gets eliminated for not being very creative. And Dr. Yasir Qadi says, I'm going for a mixture. I think that we can actually use all of these different ones and combine them into a dish. And I think the next one is okay, this is, let's see if I can get that video up there. Okay, this is his solution. Now, this was a discussion that he had with Muhammad Hijab, who you can see there. And Yasir Qadi is a Hafiz. He's memorized the whole Quran, or at least one version of it. And so if you gave him a bit of paper and a pen and enough time, he should be able to write it out totally from memory. It should be no problem for him. And that's the challenge that Muhammad Hijab gives to him. Muhammad Hijab is a British guy, and he says, well, tell me, what would you write on that bit of paper? If we can play this. Yeah.
I'm going to play this. I'll play it then, Bernie.
Okay. Yeah.
As specific as possible, I think. If I were to give you a blank mushaf, yeah, and tell you to write what is munazzal verbatim from Allah into that mushaf with no human interference, would you write something which corresponds?
It's not an easy answer. It's not an easy yes or no. It is enough for the Muslim to believe that the
I think
Quran
this should be an easy yes or no, though. Yes, Khadi. I have to.
Okay, very, very well. So, yeah, Muhammad, after we get off this phone call, me and you, let's have a number of discussions. No problem. I'm very open with advanced students.
But what would you write?
You're pushing me. And I'm saying it's not hikmah to listen. I have a condition, like I said, everything I say is going to be factual. The Quran is the uncreated speech of Allah. The Quran is preserved. The Quran is known. The Quran is mutawatir. And alhamdulillah, all of the qira'at are the Quran. All of the qira'at are authentic. Alhamdulillah. Leave it at that, ya akhi. Beyond this, honestly, I have no problem. We'll have discussions or take my class.
As you know, I spent a lot of time with Sheikh Akram, yeah? And we had these conversations about the qira'at. Like for many years, I would say many years I've had these conversations with him. His view is that, okay, the qira'at are not mutawatir. He made that public. It's not something which is on his YouTube page. I think that's fine. For many years, many people have said that. Even though I vehemently disagree with the idea that the things are not mutawatir, but many people for many years, if you look at the early tarjihat of, I don't know, Tabari, whatever, it's clear that the question of tawatur was not always a straightforward one. If someone gave you a Quran which is empty in terms of there's nothing on it, and gave you a pen, obviously you have the Quran with the qira'at. Obviously you can do isti'ana with what's maktub, but the question is, would what you write in that mushaf correspond with any? I'm not saying it's a mutawatir. I'm saying would it be sahih, authentic? Would it correspond with anything that we have in terms of the riwayat and the qira'at? If the answer is no, then for all intents and purposes, what you could be portrayed as saying is that you have a view which is not only completely anti-normative, but is beyond the scope of what was written for 1,400 years. So someone will say
if it's beyond the scope, no, who's going to bring a new Quran? A'udhu billah. We're going to have the Quran there, but which qira'ah will it be in? It'll be probably a mixture, right? It's not going to be necessarily. Fine. Yeah, okay. So let's leave it at that. Then. It's not going to be the exact Hafs and Asim bi riwayati fulan or Shu'ba. This is something that is coming at a later stage. Okay. The codification of the qira'at is coming in the 2nd, 3rd century of the Hijrah.
But you would have something which you could say is sahih.
Fully recognizable by the average Muslim, obviously. There's a problem. The problem is very simple. Yani, are you certain that that's the way that it was in early Medina? Because just like the codification occurred. But what you would have, let me put it this way, would definitely be something the average Muslim recognizes and understands and will not.
And all of it is verbatim from Allah.
This is in the hadith, ya akhi. It's exactly هَكَذَا unzil. It's literally what the Prophet said. هَكَذَا unzil. It's literally what he said. And again, this is.
It might not be a standard Hafs and Asim.
Exactly. Yes.
But what you write down will be. Is recognizable, and you believe that everything within that is munazzal min Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
100% as Allah is my witness. 100%. That is the belief.
Yes. That's very clear.
The earliest scholars of Qira'at fully understood this. But what happened was a switch in the 6th, 7th century, which kind of then ossified the tradition.
But secondly, very grateful for your openness and honesty. And I feel like the thamarat that have come from this is going to be something of benefit for so many people.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made this religion very, very vast. From the very beginning, the Sahaba had multiple understandings and interpretations. It's not just about fiqh.
Well, he was a bit prophetic there. This will have great benefit for a lot of people, but it wasn't actually the people that he thought. So if you look at stuff by J. Smith or Al-Fadi or David Wood, they've had benefited greatly from this. But you can see, he was really unwilling to try and do this, Muhammad Hijab, and I kind of squeezed that down just to a couple of minutes. He was going back and saying, but you have to say something, you know how to do this, tell us it. And eventually he says it would be a mixture. So if you show me the next slide. Okay. He says, well, the one true Quran would be a mixture of all of those different versions that we have. So the 24 versions that I've had. Now, the problem with this is that doesn't exist anywhere on the world. In the world, all we've got is the versions that we've got. We don't actually have that one true Quran. So it's a kind of a mental fiction. He's created this. He said, I could write something. I'll pull a bit out of here and a bit out of there and a bit out of there. And you would recognize because you know it from these different versions, but it wouldn't be anything like it. So it would be a man-made version. And the claim of Muslims is that the Quran is an exact copy of the version that is in heaven, the Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet. So the question is, which one, what is it? When I did debate with a Muslim scholar about this, he said, well, there are 7 versions that we can accept. And I said, well, I've got 24. So tell me, which 17 do I need to burn or toss in the Nile or something? Because, 14 of them are not authentic Qurans. He didn't quite have a response to that.
I think Dr. J. Smith and I think Hatun Tash, I think they had, over 30 of them, the extra Qurans that they had found.
Yes,
presented them at Speaker's Corner in London.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So when the Quran claims that it comes from the al-Kitab, the mother of the book, that it's this preserved tablet, we simply, when we look at the facts, and again, these are Islamic texts. These are not. This is not Western academia here. These are Muslim texts that are basically destroying the narrative that we keep hearing.
Yeah. So the version that Yasir Qadhi is, it's a fruit salad. He said, we'll chop off a bit of this and a bit of that, and we'll put it all in there. You'll recognize bits of it because that'll all be from the fruits that are there. But it doesn't exist. You can't go out into the forest and find a fruit salad. It's a man-made effort, basically, and that's what he's proposing. So the last one is what Adnan Rashid says. He says, I'm a fundamentalist. I'm going back to the basics. Have a listen to what he says. This is our last video clip.
Okay. Where's that video?
So that's on the slides. Oh no, actually, I'll do it. Let me do it. I
think it's this one here. Oops.
No, not that one. Oh yes, yeah, that one. That's the one. Yeah, can you play that?
I think that's part of the slide.
Okay, all right. I'll see if I can do that.
If you upload it, I can play it.
Yeah. Okay.
You share it and play it.
And Rashid on Qatar Arts. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay, so that's it.
I got it. Here we go.
I think he should have been more. Qadhi, I think he should have been more clear on this issue. He confused a lot of people with some vague statements he made. Either he should not have indulged in this topic in this particular interview. If he chose to indulge, then he should have gone into more details. I advise Dr. Yasir Qadhi to stop indulging in this because this is not his field. He's not an authority to say. I mean, when he wrote his book, Introduction to the Quranic Sciences, he was a graduate student from Medina University. Okay, he was in his early 20s. He was a student. Okay, I don't know what his exact qualification in the Quran is, but to ask me, if you gave me a blank codex, a blank copy, for example, a blank notebook.
Yeah.
If you gave me a blank notebook and asked me to write the Quran in it, what would I write in it? If you ask me that question, I would tell you, I would write this. You ask me this question today, what would you write on a blank notebook if we were asked to write the Quran on that blank notebook? I would write exactly this.
Yeah,
I would write this.
This is what was given. This was what came.
And why I would write that? Because this is exactly what's here, from page 1 to the page last.
Yeah, so he's being very dishonest there because he said he'd write it without any dots or vowels, but it's impossible for anyone to read that. Yeah, so the version that I got there, he gets the award for his very simple solution. You go to the next slide. Yeah, so if it hasn't got any dots, it hasn't got any vowels, it has no meaning. You can put any one of the dots in any place and you can get it to say anything that you want it to say. She can be destroying a house or he can be building a pipe just by putting the dots in different places. So yeah, it's just a non-solution. It's a bit of a cop-out. So our next slide. So that's his winning recipe. He says, we'll just go for the peels and the cores and the skins, but there's no actual flesh in there. You have to supply the flesh yourself. Yeah, which is quite an unsatisfying meal. And I'd love to give him a Quran without any dots in it and say, could you read that to me, please, from the beginning to the end? I know that he wouldn't be able to do it. Yeah, so that's the thing. Just the final one here is that the Muslim scholars admit that there are no original texts. So Anne-Marie Schimmel, who's a German lady who converted to Islam, she says no original Quranic text has survived. And Dr. Tayyar Eltikulak is a Turkish leader. He says there is no reliable information about the first mushafs or texts which were apparently destroyed or disappeared as a result of incidents and natural disasters such as wars and fires. This has been one of the greatest weaknesses and pains of the Islamic world throughout the history. So there is no original text that they can go back to and say, this was the one. All that we have is the leftovers, the undotted manuscripts, and then this kind of project from the 8th century, where people started to put together their versions, and it resulted in 816 different versions, of which 7 were chosen, then it was changed to 14, and then to 10, then to 36 or so. And I've got a substantial portion of them. So the Quran really has gone through a process, and it's not really the one book that Muslims claim that it is.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Power. That was a tour de force, to be sure. Thank you for your presentation. And I think you have demonstrated, just by looking at the evidence, that the common claim that our Muslim friends make, although sincere, that the Quran is the same. I've even heard Muslims say the Quran has remained the same. There's no dot has been changed, even though there was a time when there were no dots. No dot has been changed, no tittle, no jot. It has always remained the same since the time of Muhammad, unlike your Bibles. And so what is one of the reasons, Dr. Power, do you think that our Muslim friends make this claim, this grandiose claim of the Quran? I think, to me, it sounds like a polemic against Christianity to downgrade the Bible and to basically convert Christians and the people of the book, Jews, to Islam.
Yes. Yeah, that's certainly one of them. The other one would be kind of insecurity. Like as Christians, we live in a relationship with God, and He's adopted us as His daughters and His sons, and there's that kind of comfort and security in that. But for Muslims, that's not the case. So they're always going to be a slave of Allah. It's always going to be based on their works. And so for them, they're grasping for any kind of certainty. And the book seems to be one of the things that they can grab onto and say, well, at least we've got this book that we can rely on. But it is, Jesus said, building your house on the sand. It's a very unstable kind of basis to do. And we've seen it as a book even. That's a kind of unreliable stick.
Right. So, Dr. Power, before we let you go, we just have a few questions from our audience.
Sure.
Is it okay if you can take some questions?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, sure. Happy to do that. Yep.
Okay. So let me see here. The first question from Nada: We know that the translated Quran version does not reveal the exact meaning of certain Arabic words. I think you touched on that already.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And like each of the different translations, Arabic is a very poetic language. And again, talking with this Saudi lady who's living with us, I'd say to her, do you know this word? And she'll say, yeah, it could mean this or it could mean that. She said, but most people wouldn't know that word anyway. But it's quite a common one within the Quran. I teach it to my students. So it's a difficult language to translate. It's a Semitic language, so the structures are quite different from English, and it's and meant to be poetry. And often they love it more for the music of its recitation than actually understanding the content of it.
Right. Right. Question here from Ionan. How then? I think Abdul's. He means Muslims keep saying we have Quran from Muhammad's days, if it's just 1924 collections. So I think he's referring to the Hafs.
To the Hafs version, yeah, exactly. And again, like most Muslims are totally unaware of this, so it's a real shock to them. In our street outreach, I took a copy of the Hafs and the Warsh version, and one of the guys was a Hafiz, and I said, "Oh, great, can you read this verse to me?" And I got him to read the Hafs version, and then I showed him the Warsh, and I said, "Read that to me," and he said, "No, this is wrong." And I said, "Well, it's a Quran," and he said, "Oh, I think you printed this one yourself." Why would I bother to do that? I've been really busy printing all of these off.
Yeah.
And it's really, and again, it's this sign of insecurity that, feeling that they need to have some kind of certainty, and the rest of their religion's not giving that.
Yeah. Not just another question from Nada. We know Muslim translators tried hard to hide the meaning of certain Arabic verses and translated them falsely into an appealing way for Western taste. So which translation would you say is the most accurate? Which
Yeah,
English?
it's interesting. So Yusuf Ali was the one which does that to a T, just a total deception. He's written it for a Western audience and toned down the difficult stuff and made it seem nice. I actually like the Halali and Khan because it is quite, they're almost a little bit naive in that they'll put the real meanings out there for the most case, and then they'll put in kind of explanatory things which might make it even worse. So there'll be footnotes down the bottom, you know, so I show people this one there talking about prayer, and then they quote a hadith there. It says, you know, Muhammad said, teach your child to pray from 7 and then beat him about it after 10. And that's actually there in the bottom of the Quran. So they do have footnotes in there. So I like that. And they've taken out some of the stuff. There was the one in Surah Al-Fatiha about al-Zalimin and al-Maghdubin, the ones who have gone astray, the Christians, and the ones who Allah's anger is against, the Jews. That's no longer in the things, but it's in the Hadith. So I think it's important that people study the Hadith.
Interesting. So just again from Nada, do the geographic and ancestral mistakes or discrepancies from the Tanakh and Injil prove that the Quran is not accurate and is man-made?
I think they do, and it shows sign of a something that's not well researched, or people who were not eyewitnesses. And I'd say compare that with the Gospels, where we would get things like the pool of Siloam, for example, in Jerusalem. They never had any evidence that it existed until recently, just a couple of years ago, they found it. And you can do that with all of the things. You can go and check places, and we know times and people. The Quran, for the most part, does avoid those. You know, Mecca, I think, is mentioned only once in the Quran. Muhammad's only named 4 times. So there's a whole lot of things in there that indicate, you know, they weren't actual eyewitnesses who observed the things, who saw them. So I think those are certainly one of the issues that we look at. And the stuff about, you know, the scientific predictions or so-called truths in the Quran, that would be another one that I'll pick up. My background was in science, so I challenge those ones.
Okay. We have H. Evan. Is there a theological reason within the text of the Quran compelling Muslims to say it's preserved word for word?
Yes, yeah. So in Surah 15:9, it says, Inna nazalna adhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. So we have sent down the remembrance, or one of the names for the Quran, and we are its preservers. So this is a promise from Allah saying that He is going to preserve the Quran. So when we see that it's not preserved, then that becomes a real problem for them. Allah is not able to do that. I actually picked this one up in my book. I tell the story of a man who, this challenge that's being made to Muslims about, a challenge made by a Muslim to Christians about the Bible having been changed. And I tell the story of Donald Trump looking for a bodyguard, and here's a picture there. You can see, is that it there? No, that one there. Yeah. And a guy comes forward and he said, well, I've had lots of experience guarding presidents. So I guarded John Kennedy, and then I guarded Anwar Sadat, and I guarded Benazir Bhutto. And Trump says, what happened to them? Well, they all got assassinated. And he said, well, if you failed 3 times, how can I think that you're going to be successful with me? And I'd say it's a bit like the holy books. Muslims say there were 4. There were the Torah, the Zabur, the Injil, and the Quran. And they say 3 of them have been corrupted. On what basis should we think that Allah is reliable enough to protect the 4th one? And so Trump says to the guy, you're fired, even before he got the job. So I think that because they have this kind of idea that the Quran is preserved by Allah, therefore it can't have any kind of variation. So it raises a real problem for them.
Right. So this question, I think, is also relevant to you, Bernie. Mr. Costa, I hope you don't mind if I translate this video for my Russian subscribers. Is that okay? With your permission?
Yep, go for it. Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so there you go, Alan. You've got your answer. Okay, I think that we are I think we are pretty much done here. There's only one more question, Bernie, and then we'll be done. It's by Alan Martell. There are so many stories in Quran copied from the Bible, Talmud, and apocryphal writings. How could Muslims claim that it was sent from Allah? How do they explain clear plagiarism?
Yeah. So the standard response, is that Christians and Muslims and Jews worship the same God, and so he puts in the the bits that he needs. But we know that some of them are quite clearly they're apocryphal stories, or they've come out of the Talmud, as he mentions there. So to us, that's pretty clear plagiarism. But for them, they would say, well, firstly, that Allah can do whatever he wants. He can take anything from any source. And all of these are part of his revelation, or the way that he's worked in the world anyway. So that's not a problem for them.
I've always found it somewhat humorous in Surah 25, where the unbelievers, the kafirs, say to Muhammad, we've heard all these stories before. They're just ancient tales. We've heard them before. And the Quran actually says, no, these are actually sent down from Allah. In other words, the Quran itself denies the charge that these stories pre-existed, that it was actually sent down. It was revealed from Allah. So I always found it humorous that the kafir were actually correct there, that these stories are clearly pre-Islamic, the Talmud, the Christian apocryphal gospels, and so forth. But Dr. Power, I just want to thank you so much for joining us. This was a superb presentation. I think that if people review the video, they'll catch the gist of what you're saying about the differences, the different readings, and the different versions of the Quran. So I think that we need to tell our Muslim friends in love, we love them for the sake of Christ. We tell our Muslim friends in love that the evidence just does not bear out the claim that the Quran is this homogeneous, perfect, preserved text, that the evidence shows otherwise, and that the Quran suffered textual transmission just like every other text suffers textual corruption and transmission. So we've been honest about our Bible. We've been honest about the variants. So I think it's time our Muslim friends become honest as well about the variants in their holy book.
Amen.
So, folks, I just want to thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for giving up your time. And I pray that this session has been a blessing to you. There's a lot of information packed into this video. Please review it again. These are things you should be sharing with your Muslim friends as you share the gospel with them. So thanks again. Thank you again, Dr. Power, for giving us your time all the way in Australia, joining us. So hope to have you again sometime in the near future, if you are. All right. Okay.
All right. God bless you all. Bye-bye.
Have a good night. And until next time, the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and give you his shalom, his peace. Bye for now.